So we looked at what a project is. We looked at the overview of what a project is in theory, and we've looked at some of the tools that we can use during the project. So now we're going to take a closer look at arguably the most important part is that's so easily ignored is right at the start trying to figure out what the problem is. Actually doing some analysis and getting a better idea of what the problem is we're trying to solve. If you don't know what the problem is, then you're not going to be able to solve it. So the analysis usually will happen after your brief, but will happen before or possibly during your project proposal. Either as you're writing your project proposal, or certainly before you've submitted it, because the results of your analysis will feed into your project proposal. So most of what I'm going to explain will happen, or most of what we're going to talk about now is going to happen after your project brief, but before you submit your project proposal. So feasibility is something that we've mentioned several times already. Investment appraisal, so which is related to feasibility. The success criteria. Whilst you're trying to understand the problem, you'll be coming up with a list of things that your solution must have. And well, how do we actually, and then the last question, the last part is that looking at exactly how we're going to find answers to these things. So your analysis will consist of a feasibility study, a feasibility report, and different ways of appraising your assessment, your investment, different ways of trying to decide whether it's worth investing in or not. It might be that even after you spend all this time and effort writing a project proposal, it might be that the customer will say, you know what, actually this isn't going to be worth it, or we only have limited resources. This will save us money, but this is going to save us even more money. And yeah, your success criteria will dictate effectively what the rest of your project is all about. These are the goals that you're setting yourself. And so how do we actually find out whether something's feasible? How do we find out whether it's worth doing? How do we find out our success criteria? Well, let's look at feasibility first, because we've talked about it already. Well, it's technical. What were the other forms of feasibility? What were the other things? Yeah, whether it's legal. So technical feasibility, is it technically feasible? Is it legally feasible? Is the next one. Is it feasible within the timescales? I mean, given the amount of time we've got, is it going to be worth it? Is it going to be possible? A project can look very feasible until you find out that they want it by next week. In which case you think, that's not enough. Similarly, anything's possible with enough time. Yes, good. Social. Is it socially feasible? Do people want it? And is it financially feasible? Is it going to be economic for us to do this? I think they are pretty self-explanatory. And we have talked about this already. So probably not really worth dwelling on it too long. Social and legal, there's obviously going to be a lot of overlap between them, but often legal systems are antiquated and don't necessarily match what people genuinely want and what they think, and whether there's actually going to be a market for it. Economic feasibility is why we have investment appraisal. This is how we're going to decide whether something is worth investing in or not. Do you remember the tools, the different? I've given you some acronyms on investment appraisal already. Do you remember what they were? Okay, so one of them is net present value, and related to that is discount cash flow. Now, I've uploaded a couple of links to Moodle, which I think explain this in a lot of detail. I mean, this is an entire lecture all by itself in many ways. But long story short, it might be that you create something which saves you, I don't know, £1,000 a year, but £1,000 this year is worth more than £1,000 in 5 years' time. Taking into account inflation, it's also taking into account things like the fact that maybe your services are not going to be. So I don't know, if we invent something amazing tomorrow, then it might be that we have the entire market to ourselves. But then in 5 years' time, it might be that someone else has come along with the same idea. So our income from this particular product may well go down with time as well. Yeah, it's and so I mean the discount cash flow is basically the fiddle factor you apply to calculate your net present value. That's it in a nutshell. But there's, like I say, I mean, I've uploaded some resources to Moodle which will describe it in a much better way than me trying to explain it right now, and you listening. But that's basically in a nutshell. Net present value is trying to take into account the fact that money changes in value, and value is an odd thing anyway. So yeah, it tries to take that into account. Return on investment. And related to that is your average rate of return. So we might be that we do a project and it costs us £1,000, but it saves us £750 a year. So, and then, so yeah, and in theory, after 2 years, it's we're £500 up. We've made £500 as our return on investment after 2 years. And the average rate on return is saying, well, trying to think of an example. And a car, I think, would be a good example. So you currently have a car, and it gives maybe 20 miles to the gallon. You buy a new car that gives maybe 40 miles to the gallon, and then you imagine you're going to have this car for 5 years. So if it saves you, so say it saves you £500 a year, it's going to save you £500 over 5 years. It's going to save you £500 a year for 5 years, and your average rate of return is basically your return on investment divided by the length of time you think you're going to have this thing for, or the length of time it's going to be saving you money for. Does that make sense? Thought I might be able to explain it better than that. Return on investment is the total amount of money that it's going to save you, or that it's going to make you. Total amount of money you're going to be up. And then the average rate of return is that sum of money, the total sum of money that you're going to get from having done this project, divided by the length of time your product is going to last for. So it might save us, I don't know, upgrading our IT system might save us, I don't know, £10,000 a year, but in 5 years' time, we're going to need to upgrade it again. So yeah, if our new IT system saves us £10,000, and it's going to last 5 years, that means our average rate of return is £2,000 a year. Does that make sense? So in total, it's going to save us £10,000 over 5 years. So on average, that's going to be £2,000 a year. And you can also adjust that for inflation, and there's many other fiddle factors you can apply to that. Yes, but that's what it is in a nutshell. Return on investment is a useful thing to mention during your project proposal. And a cost-benefit analysis, which is in many ways the simple cousin of these two. A cost-benefit analysis is basically looking at how much it's going to cost you and what the benefits are, ideally putting a financial value on them, and then just weighing it up and trying to decide whether it's going to be worth doing or not. The net present value and return on investment, these are usually used to look at two different projects and decide which one is going to be better. Cost-benefit analysis is usually just looking at one project and trying to decide, trying to sell it, I suppose. So the cost-benefit analysis usually means you're just looking at one project in isolation. The top two are usually calculated on different projects, and it's something that a project executive will do when trying to decide which projects to approve and which ones not to. Does that make sense? But like I say, I've uploaded some links which explain cost-benefit analysis, net present value, and discount cash flow in more detail. Um, so yeah, please have a look at those, and then if you could the rest. Success criteria. Again, we have already mentioned these in passing. Some acronyms. What sort of things might constitute our success criteria? How do we decide whether our project's been a success or not? Yes. uh, check arrived. Check cleared. Say again? Yes. How do you decide that? Who agrees? I mean, it might be that you say, yeah, look, there, it works, see? And your customer might be going, yeah, that's not what I was expecting. That's not what we agreed. Yes. 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 So it meets the proposal, but in your proposal you will have your yes, but I mean a goal is key performance indicators. Yes, that's one of them. Key performance indicators is one. What was the other one? CSF? Give you a clue. What does that stand for? Yes, critical success factors. Great. So your critical success factors, those are the main ones. Um, if you've listed a critical success factor in your proposal that you haven't produced, chances are you're going to have to give your customer a discount. You're going to have to renegotiate your check or your timescale. So yeah, critical success factors and key performance indicators. Um, critical success factors are usually essential features that your product has to have. Key performance indicators are usually a measure of quality. Um, the nice to haves. Quality control is also, in fact, it might be also be worth doing if you're doing some research. You might also like to look at quality control. Certainly in Prince 2, there's a lot of quality-related documentation, which will fit in here. Um, and the last one, and arguably the main one, is acceptance criteria, which is also a good idea to list in your project proposal. Because when you come to evaluating your product and ending your project and sending off the invoice to the client, that will usually happen after the acceptance criteria have been met and it's been agreed that they've been met. Then you can send off your invoice. Accepted. Works. Yes. That would be £50,000. Whilst they're happy, it's a good time for them to get the bill. So how do we go about getting this information? How do we go about deciding what our critical success factors are? How do we go about doing our feasibility study? How do we go about trying to calculate whether it's going to be financially feasible or not? Doing our investment proposal. What do we need to do in order to get this information? Yes. So what kind of things will this consultant be doing? Yes, end users are going to be crucial in this particular in this section. You were close when you talking about feedback. How do you get feedback? Yes. Say again? Questionnaires. Excellent. Yes. Getting your customer to fill in some questionnaires. Um, definitely. So questionnaires is one. What else is there? How else can you get some input from your customer into this? How else can you find out what it is you need your system to do? Yes, good. So visit, perhaps I use the word observation. So actually observe a system which is similar to the one you're going to build, see how people are using it. Not just observe completed systems, but also maybe the current system. Have a look at the process flows, have a look at what they're currently doing. Before you try to say, I know what we're going to build a new system, it's going to be great, and it's going to do exactly what you want. It might be worth figuring out what people actually need to use it for. What do people use the current system for? And then you can design a system that will match what they need perfectly, rather than just sort of dumping something on them and say, get on with it. And this isn't what I need. This isn't what I didn't do what I wanted to. Don't just assume that your new product is going to be better. It's going to help them do their job, because it might not. So yeah, observe current users and maybe observe other users in other places. So yeah, observation, questionnaires. You say talking to them. Interview is a posh word for talking to someone. So yeah, you do questionnaires, do some observation, and do some interviews. I can't remember what other ones are. Oh yeah, focus groups. Good. Yeah. So not just maybe sort of interviewing individuals, but maybe group interviews, focus groups. Yes. And documentation. It might be that you just need to read up about this particular subject. It might be that you don't actually know much about what it is at the moment. Documentation, not just looking at websites and maybe looking on the particular topics and individual systems, because it's going to be unique. So you might have to do quite a lot of research on the system that you're going to be rolling out. But also looking at financial records, looking at how much money you think the system is actually going to save you, how much it's going to cost you. I mean, part of this documentation might be quotes from different suppliers. In fact, it might be worth writing quotes down there. I'll leave it to it. But yeah, documentation is a nice catch-all term that can mean, yeah, studying, looking at books, looking at financial records, looking at maybe sort of workflows, maybe asking for a printout from the current system, see what kind of information the system is storing. Quotes from different suppliers for the kit that you might need, and stuff. But all of this will help you answer the questions that we've been looking at. It'll help you decide whether your project's going to be feasible, whether it's going to make you money, or how much money it's actually going to make you, and yeah, what your success factors are going to be, what your performance indicators are going to be. Yeah. So who's it for? Think about who's actually going to be reading your documentation. It's always a good idea to think about who's going to be pitched at and the purpose of writing it. The summary is going to be read by everybody. How technical is your project executive? How technical are your customers? It's all very well and good to say we're going to give you a brand new server. It's going to be a cloud-based system. It's heavily virtualized. It's going to be 8 racks of servers with 8 core Xeons that are going to be clustered. It's going to be marvelous. Okay. They might not know what that is or why it's good. They might not necessarily understand why. Yeah, if you're going to get a customer to agree something, it's essential that they understand it. Otherwise, you can end up with grumpy customers in the future. Yeah, so writing everything in a sort of non-ambiguous way, I think, is also going to be quite important. And whilst you're doing all this, whilst you're doing your interviews and your observations and you're sort of looking around at all these things, you're trying to calculate how much money it's going to cost you, and how much money you're going to make from it, and what your aims, what it is you're aiming to achieve. You might also like to be noting down some risks. You will discover these along the way. You'll think, okay, so we imagine that this is going to happen like this, but what if this doesn't happen? What if our specialist gets hit by a bus? What happens if, I don't know, this particular product ends up getting retired? What happens if one of our suppliers goes bust? There's any number of things which might happen along the way. So a risk assessment is a big posh term, and it's a great thing to, again, it's another wonderful piece of jargon that's very good to just sort of hurl at people in meetings. Have you done a risk assessment? No. But what is a risk assessment? Um, well, uh, a risk assessment is basically a list of what might happen, both positive and negative. A risk assessment can be a risk might be a good thing. It might be the risk that uh, something good happens. I mean, there's always a risk that it's going to be better than you thought it was going to be. Though generally, I suppose you expect it to be negative things. So what are the bad things that might happen? What are the good things that might happen? And if that thing were to happen, what would the effect be? How bad would it be if one of your suppliers went bust? How dependent are you on that supplier? So having looked at those things, how can we reduce the impact? It might be that you don't want to reduce the impact. You just sort of accept, well, the odds of, I mean, if the odds of it happening are very, very slim, um, then maybe you just sort of accept it. Um, yeah, so how do we reduce the impact of if it does actually happen? You might also like to look at reducing the chance of it happening. Strategy for dealing with just reducing the chance. Um, and again, risk assessments alone can probably take up an entire lecture. Um, but um, there's different strategies for dealing with risk. Um, risk avoidance is just basically trying to make sure that it doesn't happen. Risk acceptance is saying, okay, so this might happen, and if it does, this is our plan B. So having a plan B is one way of dealing with risks. There's risk, risk offloading, risk delegation. I forget exactly what it's called, but it basically means insurance. So you basically buy an insurance policy. So if I do get ill for whatever reason, or I lose a leg, then I might have an insurance policy that will cover me for up to a certain sum. Um, where I mean, insurance companies basically deal in risk. They say, okay, we'll buy that risk. So if it does happen, then we'll pay you money, and if it doesn't, then well, we've made a little bit. It's all about probabilities. So yeah, there's all sorts of different ways of dealing with risk, which you may or may not like to include in your submissions. But yes, it's worth mentioning. It's worth mentioning that risks are there and identifying what risks and reducing the chances and the impact is something that you may well like to document in your proposal, in your plan, especially having a plan B. If you've got a plan B, you haven't got a plan, which is quite a good phrase. So that's it. This then will allow you to go back up. Oh, okay, let me give them a use. It will. Zoom down. So this is what will make up the bulk of your analysis. Feasibility study, an investment appraisal, the success criteria, and what it is you're trying to get the thing to do, and then how you're actually going to go about doing your analysis, and it may also be worth including a risk assessment. Any questions? Any other points? Anything I didn't include? Anything you were expecting me to talk about and I didn't? The insurance policy usually goes into quite a lot of detail about what is covered and what is not covered. And if you actually need to make a claim, then you need to prove that what you're claiming on, the event that you're claiming, was actually covered by the policy. So that's what the whole point of insurance policy is outlining what's covered and what's not covered. Yes. Good. Like I say, there's a number of links on Moodle about net present value, discounted cash flow, cost benefit analysis, and risk management. So you might like to have a look at those. and make some more notes. And I think it will spend the next half hour or so. You just transform some of those notes, get whatever's in your brain at the moment down on paper while it's still fresh in your mind, and maybe do a bit more reading around it. If you find any more useful links, please put them on the forum. Great.